My father sold me to the Lycan King as a joke, a barren, defected daughter sent to insult the throne. But the moment the king locked the door, he didn't attack me. He backed away in terror. He didn't smell a victim. He smelled a golden wolf, a biological weapon extinct for centuries. And it just woke up in my blood. My father offered me up like cattle to the slaughter. Eager to wash his hands of the burden, he gripped the mahogany table, knuckles bleached white, terror vibrating off him, in waves, not for me, but out of fear that the king might reconsider. The air tasted of copper and stale tobacco, biting at my exposed skin until goosebumps rose like braille. She is empty. Alpha Tobin's voice slicked with desperation. Barren, just as you requested. A defect who yields no heirs, and therefore no trouble. My gaze anchored to the floorboards, to the king's boots, heavy combat leather, caked with fresh mud on the heel. King Darius Valerius remained a silent monolith by the fireplace, his back turned to the negotiation. He didn't just occupy space, he consumed it, a black hole swallowing the room's light and oxygen. Sign. The command rolled through the floorboards, vibrating up through the soles of my shoes. Of course. My father scrambled for the quill. The dowry is standard. Leave it. Darius pivoted. My lungs seized, air trapped in a strangled knot. A jagged scar bisected his eyebrow, mapping violence across his features. Eyes of burnished steel dismissed my father as a stain before sliding to me. Calculating. Assessing. I wasn't a person, I was collateral. His gaze didn't waver. The girl signs. It is her life. Let her throw it away. Parchment slid across the wood, hitting my hip. Do it, Sienna. Don't embarrass me. I stepped into the trap. Defect. Barren. Empty. The labels rattled inside my skull. I lifted the heavy gold quill, the metal cold against my sweating palm, and drowned the nib in black ink. The text stared back. Clause 4. Trade rights, in exchange for the Alpha's daughter. My hand hovered, trembling over the sentence that sold my soul. Sweat beaded on my father's upper lip. His eyes glossed over with greed. He didn't care if I rotted in this den of predators, as long as he walked away rich. Rage, hot and sudden, sparked in my chest. If I was to be currency, I would determine the exchange rate. I bypassed the signature line. I drove the nib through clause 4, a thick, wet strike that tore the fibers of the page with a violent scratch. My father sucked in a breath. Sienna, what are you? I ignored him, carving new terms into the margin with sharp, jagged strokes. Condition, immediate rescue of Alara to the safe zone, tonight. I blew the excess ink dry and slashed my signature at the bottom. Sienna. The gold quill hit the table with a dull thud. I met the king's steel gaze, my chin lifted. I am obedient, but I am not cheap. My father lunged, hand raised high. You stupid little... A shadow eclipsed the light. Darius materialized. No shout, no warning. He snatched my father's wrist mid-swing. A wet crunch echoed, like a stepped-on branch. My father crumpled, a scream tearing from his throat. The sickening crack still echoed in my ears, and the sudden quiet was absolute, broken only by my father's whimpers and the ragged race of my own heartbeat. Darius stepped over the sobbing heap, his focus locked on me. A furnace of body heat radiated from him, close enough to reveal the molten gold flecks drowning in his grey irises. He snatched the parchment, read the defiance. His gaze dropped to my throat, my wrists, my eyes. He leaned in, nostrils flaring as he inhaled a deep, ragged breath, hunting for the fear, hunting for the animal. I stiffened, waiting for the inevitable disgust. He would find nothing, a void, a genetic dead end. But his brow furrowed. He inhaled again, drinking the air around my neck. The granite mask of his face cracked. Where is it? The question rumbled deep in my own chest. Where is what? My voice barely held. Heat spiked under my skin. Not a blush, but a painful, feverish burn, born of pure terror. Your scent. Darius's grip splintered the edge of the mahogany table. You don't smell human. You don't smell like one of us. He crowded my space, his nose brushing the frantic pulse at my jugular. I shuddered. You smell like the ozone before a lightning strike. He pulled back, his pupils constricting to pinpricks. Get her, sister. He didn't blink. And remove this filth before I tear the rest of his limb from the socket. Guards dragged my father's weeping form into the hallway. The fever under my skin surged, molten and agonizing. I dug my fingernails into the wood to stay upright. I had survived. But as Darius watched me, a predator eyeing a new, confusing meal, I realized the truth. He didn't just look hungry, he looked starved.
She was walking straight into her own grave. I tracked her from the shadows of the mezzanine, a hawk circling a field of mice. The ballroom teemed with liars. My court, the obsidian circle. They postured in deceptive velvet and silk, smiling with too many teeth. Sienna stood isolated in the center of the kill box. She looked fragile, a smudge of charcoal smoke against the expansive black marble. She gripped a flute of dark vintage, fingers clamped so tight the skin pulled taut and bloodless against the crystal stem. I purchased a target. I didn't expect a weapon. In the war room, she hadn't just rewritten the contract. She'd met my stare without flinching. Most wolves choked on their own fear when I closed the distance. But the void where her scent should be, it gnawed at me. My inner predator paced the cage of my mind, claws scraping the bone. What is she? Your Majesty? The voice slid into my ear like warm oil. I didn't turn. Lord Vane, a traitor masquerading as a patriot. A pity about the new queen. Ice clinked in Vane's tumbler. She looks brittle. One gust of wind might shatter her. We shall see. My tone dropped to absolute zero. My focus snapped back to Sienna. She moved toward the buffet. Vane's spawn, a cocky upstart named Kyle, intercepted her path. Calculated, deliberate. His shoulders slammed into hers. I locked up, muscles coiled tight as steel cable. I waited for the flinch, the tears, the desperate look for a savior. That's what a human would do. That's what a weakling would do. Sienna didn't stumble. She opened her hand. Gravity took the glass. Smash. Crimson vintage exploded across Kale's pristine white boots. Crystal shrapnel skittered across the floor like jagged diamonds. Silence strangled the room. Sienna advanced. She didn't skirt the mess. She walked through it. Her silk slippers ground the shards into the stone with a sickening crunch. She invaded Kale's personal space, staring straight through his chest. Oh, her voice was soft, slicing the air like razor wire. How clumsy, my lord. The floor is treacherous for those who cannot handle their liquor. Kale flushed a violent beet red. You little. Careful. A smile ghosted her lips, sharp and unamused. The king despises a mess. I would hate for him to think you caused one. She tilted her head, eyes dead cold. Pick it up. Kale froze. The court held its breath. Refuse and insult the queen. Obey and bow to a barren defect. Rage vibrated off him, but he bent. His fingers grasped the jagged glass. A dark amusement tugged at my mouth. She wasn't prey. She was a steel trap waiting to snap. The sheer tension in the ballroom began to dissolve into nervous murmurs. The collective held breath of the court exhaling in a rush of perfumed air. Then the atmosphere shifted. Sienna swayed. A feverish flush raced up her neck, turning the skin mottled in pink. The scent hit me. Not perfume, not wine. My head snapped up. It slammed into me like a physical blow, the sharp, ionized bite of a brewing thunderstorm. and underneath it, ancient dust and amber. The animal inside me went dead still. Mine? It whispered. No, not mate. Threat? The energy poured off her in waves. I pushed off the balcony rail, body moving faster than thought. Clear the room. The low growl vibrated in my chest. The guards blinked. Clear the room! The roar rattled the window panes in their frames. The court scattered like roaches exposed to light. I strode across the floor, boots crushing the glass she had left behind. She gripped the table edge, trembling violently. I seized her arm. Her skin wasn't warm. It was an incinerator. What are you? She looked up, eyes glazed with delirium. I don't feel well, she whispered. The metallic tang coated my tongue, the taste of raw, unbridled energy. I hauled her flush against my chest. You aren't barren. My voice scraped like gravel. You're a bomb. She collapsed. As her weight settled against me, the ballroom windows flashed white. Fogged over. Instantly. Steam rolled off her skin, hissing against the cool air. I stared at the opaque glass. This wasn't just a girl. And this wasn't just a marriage. I had invited a catastrophe into my house, and God help me. I wanted to watch it burn.
The chaotic shouts of the court faded into a muffled drone as the king carried me through the labyrinthine corridors, until the cold marble gave way to the stifling heat of his private chambers. Liquid fire replaced my blood, turning my veins into rivers of magma. I woke with a gasp that tore my throat raw. The room had no air, only heat. My skin pulled tight across my bones, a casing too small to hold the detonation building inside. Drink. The command vibrated against my skull. Vision swam in oily smears of light and shadow. King Darius eclipsed the fireplace, a monolith of dark intent. He shoved a tumbler of ice water toward me, his grip so tight a hairline fracture spiderwebbed up the crystal. You're burning up. A wet, freezing cloth slapped against my forehead. It should have been relief. Instead, the water hissed like a drop on a hot skillet, instant steam rising to cloud my vision. I need to leave. I clawed at the sheets, trying to lever myself upright as the room tilted on its axis. The servants' quarters. Get me out. You aren't going anywhere. Darius slammed me back against the pillows, his hand a heavy iron weight pinning my shoulder. You fogged the ballroom glass. His voice dropped to a lethal whisper. You reek of static charge and grave dust. This isn't sickness, little liar. You're shifting. I went rigid. Pain spiked in response. A serrated blade twisting behind my ribs. No. I shook my head, sweat flinging from my hair. I can't shift. I'm barren, a genetic dead end. Lies. He invaded my space, close enough for me to count the gold flecks in his irises, close enough to choke on his scent of steel and dried blood. Who owns you? Is this a trap? Did the Circle send a suicide bomber to level my palace? No. Then what are you? Rough calluses dug into my jaw, forcing my head back until my neck strained. Spit it out, or I let the fever consume you until there is nothing left but ash. Panic detonated, not fear of the man, looming over me, but terror of the pressure building under my skin. The vessel was cracking. Get off me, I shrieked. My hands flew out. I only wanted space. I was 100 pounds of exhaustion against a wall of muscle. But the tether inside me snapped. A shockwave tore from my palms. Darius didn't stumble. He launched backward as if hit by a freight train. 200 pounds of lethal monarch flew across the chamber. He collided with the solid oak wardrobe, the wood exploding on impact. Splinters rained down as the heavy doors cracked down the center with a sound like a gunshot. Silence rushed back in to fill the vacuum. I stared at my hands, fingers trembling, pale and small, but the air around my knuckles distorted, shimmering like a mirage on hot asphalt. Darius shifted in the wreckage. A thumb wiped a streak of crimson from his lip. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold, dawning horror. He rose, dusting oak splinters from his shoulder, eyes flicking from the shattered. Furniture to me. That, his voice rasped, was not human. I scrambled backward until my spine hit the headboard. I didn't mean to. I don't know. You aren't a defect, Sienna. He backed toward the exit, keeping a wide berth, treating me like unexploded ordnance. You are a weapon. The heavy door groaned open. Wait! I reached out. Don't leave me. He didn't turn. I'm not leaving you. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. I'm containing you. The deadbolt slid home with a final metallic clack. I was alone, and the fire inside began to eat.
Hours bled away in isolation, the oppressive silence of her containment shattered only by the distant, muffled sounds of the training yard greeting the harsh midday sun. The slaughter began at high noon. I stood in the center of the training yard, the clay floor baked into brick by the relentless sun. Sweat stung my eyes. Then the sky darkened. Ambush. The warning died in a wet gurgle. Arrows rained down, turning the dirt into a pincushion. Steel met meat with a sickening thud. The obsidian circle had abandoned their poisons. They brought a sledgehammer. Protect the king. My captain's voice cut out abruptly. Assassins cascaded down the high limestone walls like spilled ink. Black masks, silent footing. My blade cleared the scabbard, singing a high, lethal note. The first assailant died without a sound, his head separated from his shoulders in a spray of hot, arterial red. I severed the arm of the second. But they were a swarm. 10 of them closed the distance, a tightening noose of serrated steel. Surrender, King Darius. The leader circled, his blade dripping. Your bloodline ends in the dirt. My lip curled. The animal inside roared, clawing to breach my skin. But shifting took time, a split second of paralysis. A second was all they needed to gut me. I was dead. I grounded my boots in the bloody dust. I would take them to hell with me. Crash. High above, the window to my private quarters vomited glass. Time suspended. Sienna. She didn't climb out. She plummeted, 40 feet of lethal gravity. She should have shattered on impact. She hit the earth not with a thud, but with a cratering explosion. Dust billowed, obscuring the violence. She rose from the debris, barefoot, dress shredded, hair a wild halo. She was burning, not with fire, with a blinding solar violence that radiated from her pores. She looked like she had swallowed a star. Step back. The command didn't come from her throat. It vibrated through the tectonic plates beneath us. One assassin laughed. Look, the king's pet defect. He lunged. Sienna didn't flinch. She backhanded the empty air. Snap. The shockwave folded his chest plate like tin foil. He flew 20 feet backward, hitting the stone wall as wet paste. The laughter died. Kill her! The leader shrieked. They swarmed. 9 blades turning on one girl. Sienna didn't run. She seized a cast-iron training spear from the rack. 50 pounds of dead weight swung like a twig in her grip. Where her skin touched the metal, the black iron flashed into liquid sunlight. She spun. She drove the butt of the spear into the scorched earth. A wave of golden force detonated outward. It knocked the assassins flat, cracking the cobblestones in a spiderweb pattern. I threw an arm over my face. The heat was a physical blow. The air reeked of charged static and petrified resin, the scent of the first alphas. The legends were real. The assassins scrambled up, eyes wide with primal terror. They broke, they ran. The metallic tang of spilled blood mingled with the scorching heat radiating from the courtyard stones, while the deafening ringing of the shock wave slowly faded from my ears. Silence suffocated the courtyard. Sienna swayed in the center of the devastation. The glow faded to a dull simmer. She dropped the spear. Clang. She looked at me, pupils blown wide, trembling, waiting for praise, waiting for safety. Darius? Her whisper was a plea. I looked at the cracked earth. I looked at the broken bodies. Then I looked up. The palace windows were lined with faces. My court, the spies, the world. If they knew what she was. This wasn't a coup. It was a world war. They would hunt her down and tear her apart for the power in her marrow. I couldn't protect her. Not if she was free. Ice flooded my veins, killing the adrenaline. Guards! My voice cracked like a whip. Sienna flinched. Darius? Seize her. I forced my face into a mask of granite. She is a danger to the crown. Chain her. What? Her voice shattered. I saved you. You almost destroyed the palace. I lied. I had to become the monster to save her. Put her in the silver cuffs, drag her to the dungeon. Guards hesitated, then grabbed her arms. Sienna didn't fight. She just stared, golden eyes drowning in betrayal. I trusted you, she choked out. I turned my back. Take her away. Her screams faded into the dark stone corridors. I stared at the scorch marks she left behind. I would keep her safe, even if I had to burn her heart to ash to do it.
The sunlit terror of the courtyard was quickly replaced by the damp, suffocating darkness of the subterranean hold, the descent marked by the echoing clatter of iron boots on stone. The dungeon didn't just smell like rust, it tasted like old pennies and despair. I huddled on the freezing flagstones, spine pressed against the granite. The silver manacles bit into my wrists, a ring of frozen fire designed to smother the wildfire in my blood. But the metal didn't dampen the heat. It concentrated it. Iron hinges screamed in protest. Darius filled the frame, blocking out the torchlight from the corridor. His silk shirt hung in tatters, a map of the violence he'd just survived. He carried a dented silver tray. Steam rose from a bowl of brown stew, smelling of rosemary and guilt. Eat. The command fell flat against the stone walls. I ignored the food. I focused on the mud, drying on his combat boots. You put me in a cage. I placed you in a vault. He set the tray on the rotting wooden stool. The circle saw the light, Sienna. If I let you run, they won't just hunt you. They will vivisect you to see how you tick. So you beat them to it? I forced my chin up. You chained me so they couldn't? He flinched. I am keeping you breathing. You don't understand politics. I understand cages. I forced my trembling legs to lock. I stood. I lived in one for 22 years. My father sold me to escape his cage. You bought me to secure yours. I am nothing like that, coward. His voice dropped, dangerous and low. You are. I stepped closer, letting the chains rattle. You're worse. You promised me a crown, but the moment I showed you my teeth, you reached for the leash. A muscle feathered in his jaw. He looked away, staring at the damp wall. I am afraid for you. The admission was barely a breath. The golden wolf hasn't walked this earth for 1,000 years. It terrifies them. It terrifies me. It scares you, I corrected, because you can't control it. I lashed out. My bare foot connected with the tray. Clatter. Stew painted his boots in greasy streaks. The bread rolled into the filth of the floor. I snatched the heavy metal spoon from the mess. Darius watched me. He didn't flinch. I won't eat your food, and I won't be your prisoner. I retreated to the wall. I began to grind the handle against the granite. Scrape, scrape. A rhythm of defiance. Sienna, go away. Scrape. Leave me to my cell, King Darius. He stood there, a statue of regret in the dim light. Finally he turned. I will return when you are rational. He walked to the heavy door. Then the world ended. The outer wall didn't break, it atomized. A concussion of dust and masonry slammed me against the stone, rattling my teeth in my skull. Darkness danced at the edges of my vision. Darius roared, a dagger flashing from his boot. Obsidian circle! But the shadows moved first. Figures in gas masks poured through the breach like oil. Canisters hissed, spewing thick green fog. It hit my lungs like bleach, concentrated wolfsbane. Darius lunged. He was a blur of motion, but the gas was a physical wall. He crumpled, clutching his throat, the invincible monarch reduced to a wheezing ruin. Sienna! He reached out, fingers clawing the stone. I tried to crawl. My limbs were lead. The spoon slipped from my numb fingers. Specimen secured. The voice was muffled, clinical. The doctor is waiting. Gloved hands seized my arms. They dragged me backward through the shattered wall. My last sight was Darius, paralyzing toxins seizing his lungs, watching me disappear. I wanted to scream his name. But the darkness didn't just take me, it swallowed me whole.
Pain fractured my skull into jagged shards. I retched, my lungs seizing against the acrid burn of sulfur. Wolfsbane. The paralyzing agent coated my throat like tar, drowning the fire in my blood. I rolled onto my side, ribs screaming. The cell was a hollowed-out tooth. The wall was rubble. The silver tray overturned. The spoon gone. And Sienna was gone. No. The denial rasped through my bruised larynx. I clawed my way upright, gripping the stone doorframe until mortar crumbled under my fingernails. My legs were water, but my eyes found the trail. Drag marks scarred the dust and the scent. Not the ozone of the golden wolf. That was buried under the chemical suppression. This was the sour reek of terror, her terror, and underneath it, the clinical, freezing smell of antiseptic. Vane. I spat the name like a curse. The traitorous lord and his mountaintop slaughterhouse. Rumors of experiments on the weak. I didn't waste breath on the guards. I didn't sound the alarm. Time was a luxury I didn't have. I let the monster take the wheel. Bones snapped and rearranged with a sickening wet crunch. Fur erupted through skin. Vision narrowed to a monochrome tunnel of prey and violence. I became the shadow on 4 legs. I ate the miles. I followed the tire tracks until my lungs burned like coals. I ran until the sun bled out against the horizon, painting the sky in arterial red. The fortress loomed in the valley, smelling of silver and wet copper. I didn't knock. I disintegrated the front gate. Wood shattered. The first guard lost his throat before he could scream. The second lost his spine. I was a hurricane of claws and teeth. Where is she? I tracked the antiseptic stench down, deep into the earth. A reinforced steel door barred the path. I hit it like a battering ram, shoulders bruised, metal screamed, bang. The hinges sheared. I skidded into the room, a roar primed in my throat, ready to slaughter everyone inside. It died in my chest. I froze. The room was a blinding white operating theater. Harsh halogens, a metal table. Lord Vane dangled 2 feet off the linoleum. Sienna had him by the windpipe. Heavy leather restraints hung from the table like confetti. One of her hands was still shackled, but the steel was twisted like saltwater taffy. Her free hand, the one crushing Vane's throat, wasn't human. Fingers elongated, talons dripping with blistering celestial fire. Her hair defied gravity, floating in a halo of static charge. Her skin pulsed, luminous and terrifying. She didn't look at me. She stared into Vane's bulging eyes. You wanted to see what was inside. Her voice was a harmonic distortion, hers layered over the grinding of deep earth fault lines. Please, Vane gurgled. Mercy. Mercy is a luxury you cannot afford. She squeezed. Wet cartilage collapsed. Vein dropped like a puppet with cut strings. He hit the floor with a heavy, final thud. The scientists in the corner huddled together, reeking of urine and terror. The harsh hum of the halogen lights seemed to amplify in the terrifying silence, accompanied only by the sickening drip of fluids from the operating table. Sienna pivoted. She looked at them. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were voids of liquid gold. No iris, no pupil, just nuclear fusion. I waited for the recognition, the relief. Instead, she curled her lip. A snarl, a warning. She tore her other hand free from the twisted steel cuff with a sharp ping. She rose, the light flared, bleaching the shadows from the room. I am not a specimen. She stepped over the corpse. And I am not a pet. She advanced. I retreated. Me, the apex sovereign, stepping back. Because the truth hit me harder than the poison. I hadn't come here to save her. She had saved herself. And now, she was the most dangerous thing breathing.
We left the underground slaughterhouse to rot in the mountains. The violent aftermath, giving way to the steady, hypnotic hum of the transport carrying us back to the capital. The V-12 engine purred beneath us, a dark, rhythmic counterpoint to the adrenaline crashing through my veins. Silence filled the cabin. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, loaded with the things we hadn't said. I stared at my palms, clean. The solar flare of my power had cauterized the evidence, incinerating the blood. But the phantom sensation of veins vertebrae collapsing under my grip, that remained. A cold, heavy ghost on my skin. I didn't regret the kill. But as the obsidian gates loomed, I knew the girl who left this palace was dead. The victim was gone. We entered the throne room. It was a graveyard of granite and glass. Debris crunched under my boots with every step. Amidst the ruin, 2 seats survived. One a monolith of black iron and spikes. The king's. The other, a delicate velvet cushion, a perch for a songbird, a cage. Darius moved to a debris-strewn side table. His fingers, stained with war, lifted a loop of silver, a tiara, thin, fragile, encrusted with diamond dust. Sienna. His voice was granite grinding against iron. Exhausted. The court is gathering. The pack needs a visual. They need to see that we are united. He extended the silver band. Wear this. Stand at my right hand. Let them see you belong to me. I stepped across the fractured marble. Click, click. I took the offering. It weighed nothing. Air and expectations. It's beautiful. My fingers tightened. The metal warmed, not from body heat, but from the reactor in my blood. Creak. Darius's pupils dilated. I didn't speak. I folded the alloy like wet cardboard. The diamonds shot loose, hitting the floor with sharp pings. The band snapped in two. I let the twisted wreckage fall. Clatter. I am not an ornament, Darius. And I am not your subject. I bypassed him. Bypassed the velvet chair. I went straight to the war table. My palms slammed onto the map of the kingdom, covering the capital. I saved your life. I killed the traitor. The girl you bought for a treaty is dead. I locked eyes with him. If I rule as an apex, not a consort. Equal. The atmosphere vacuumed out. Thick tension choked the space between us. Darius stared at the ruined silver on the floor. Then at me. He didn't argue. A slow, terrifying heat rose in his eyes. Not anger, hunger. The look of a man realizing he didn't buy a wife. He bought a war. Equal. He stalked toward me, crowding my space until his chest brushed mine. His hand gripped the back of my neck, thumb pressing into my pulse. Then let's go, show them the monsters.
I threw the heavy glass doors wide. The wind hit us like a physical blow, carrying the scent of coming rain and crushed pine needles. Below, the courtyard was a sea of upturned faces. Thousands of them. Silence hung over the cobblestones like a guillotine blade. They were waiting for a monster or a corpse. I stepped into the light. No cheers, no bows, just the heavy, suffocating weight of judgment. They watched to see if their king still bled. I didn't speak. I shifted my weight, ceding the center stage. Sienna emerged from the shadows. No silk, no crown. She wore a stolen black tunic from the armory, hem frayed at the knee. Her feet were bare against the cold stone. Her hair, a tangled banner of war. She didn't look like royalty. She looked like a deity who had crawled out of the dirt. She moved to the limestone railing. She didn't hide behind me. She planted herself at my right hand, shoulder to shoulder, iron against iron. Moon River. My voice rolled over the stone walls like thunder. The traitors are ash. The circle is broken. The crowd rippled, a collective shiver of unease. And the old laws die with them. I looked at Sienna. A sharp nod. She raised a palm to the sky. The air pressure dropped. Instantly. A high-pitched whine, like a capacitor charging, screamed through the courtyard. Solar fire detonated from her skin. It wasn't a glow, it was a supernova. Blinding, violent. The color of noon in the desert. The intake of breath from below sounded like the tide going out. My name is Sienna. Her voice wasn't amplified. It was resonant, vibrating in the marrow of every bone within a mile. And I am not barren. She squeezed the railing. Crunch. Solid limestone turned to powder in her grip, dusting the heads of the guards below. I am the blood of the first, and I claim this territory. Silence. The ozone burned our nostrils. The pressure bowed the trees. Then, movement. One knee hit the dirt. Then 10. Then thousands. A wave of submission crashing against the palace walls. They didn't bow to me. They bowed to the sun. My chest expanded. No jealousy. Just a fierce, terrifying pride. The predator inside me paced, satisfied. Mate. Apex. Equal. She turned. The nuclear fire faded from her iris, leaving warm, exhausted brown. Well, husband, she whispered, a smirk pulling at the corner of her mouth. Now the real bleeding begins. I captured her hand. Her skin was still fever-hot against my cool palm. Yes. I pulled her in until her breath ghosted across my lips. But first, I lowered my voice to a lethal growl. We need to rewrite the submission clause. She laughed, a sound like glass breaking. The palace didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like a hunting ground. And we were the only things left worth fearing.
We left the roaring adoration of the masses behind, navigating the winding stone staircases until the heavy oak doors of the royal suite finally sealed us away from the world. The roar of the crowd faded, replaced by a silence so heavy it pressed against my eardrums. I threw the heavy mahogany deadbolt. Click. The celebration below died instantly, severed by 4 inches of solid wood. I sagged against the grain, the adrenaline crash hitting me like a physical blow. The nuclear fire under my skin banked down to glowing embers, retreating into the marrow. I wasn't a deity anymore. Just a woman in a stolen, sweat-stained tunic, inhaling the scent of cedar and expensive soap that clung to the bedsheets. Darius dominated the center of the room. War still clung to him. Soot stained his knuckles, and his chest plate bore the silver scars of deflecting lethal blows. He stripped the armor off with efficient, jerky movements. You're trembling. He advanced 1 step, then froze. Muscles locked. He wasn't hunting. He was asking. I'm not afraid. I pushed off the door, legs unsteady on the plush rug. I'm just hollowed out. You should be terrified. He undid the final buckle. The steel chest plate hit the floor with a heavy, final clang. You didn't just rewrite history, Sienna. You burned the book, The pack doesn't know how to metabolize a queen who eclipses the king. And the sovereign? I close the distance, the stone floor cold against my bare feet. Does he know how to survive the eclipse? His pupils blew wide, blackness devouring the grey of his eyes. A starving man looking at a feast. He wasn't sure he was allowed to touch. I am evolving. He fished a crumpled ball of parchment from his trousers. It was battered, stained with a single rusty drop of dried blood. The contract. The ink I had slashed through in the war room. Clause 4. He smoothed the paper against his thigh, the sound of crinkling paper loud in the quiet room. The girl signs away her life. He met my gaze. Void. You aren't currency anymore. He strode to the hearth and fed the paper to the dying embers. We watched the parchment curl, the fire eating our names until nothing remained but grey flakes drifting up the chimney. So what does that make us? The firelight caught the gold flecks in his eyes. Partners. He turned, the fire casting long shadows across his face. Equals. He crossed the room. No hesitation, no permission asked. His hand cupped my jaw, rough calluses scraping tender skin, thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone. And he leaned down, forehead resting against mine, sharing the same breath. I think we are bound. The breath was stolen from my lungs. Mates. The biological imperative slammed into me. I felt it in the courtyard. My voice shook. When the star death hit, the energy didn't just explode. It reached for you. It didn't reach. His growl vibrated through my chest wall. It conquered. He crushed his mouth to mine. It wasn't a kiss. It was a collision. A desperate, starving thing that tasted of wood smoke and survival. I tangled my fingers in his hair, pulling him down, anchoring him to me. No pain, no destroying fever, just a molten, liquid heat that promised creation instead of ash. Sienna. He broke the kiss, gasping against my lips. My golden storm. I shoved him backward. He hit the mattress with a heavy thud. Less talking, husband. I crawled over him, claiming my ground. Show me. The politics died at the door. There were no crowns here, just the friction of skin on skin, and the king who finally learned how to kneel.
The chaotic heat of the night slowly burned itself out, replaced by the creeping, solitary chill of early morning as the sun breached the horizon. Daylight broke over an empty bed. Residual warmth clung to the silk, the scent of ozone and crushed jasmine lingering on the pillows where her head had rested. I sat up, the silence of the room settling into my skin like a phantom limb. For one fleeting heartbeat, I let the sensation of quiet peace anchor me to the mattress. But peace is a lie sovereigns tell themselves to survive the night. I stood and paced to the window, the floorboards cold against my bare soles. Sienna sat on a limestone bench in the garden below, her profile bathed in the amber wash of the rising sun. She looked settled, safe. Yet the animal in my chest clawed at my lungs, restless and sensing a shift in the wind. An ominous weight settled in the room. A raven waited on the iron perch by my desk, black feathers sleek against the morning light. A small scroll was lashed to its leg with twine, the seal a blob of obsidian wax. The crest was a void. No pack in the known territories claimed this mark. I cracked the wax, the dry snap echoing through the chamber. The parchment felt thick, ancient, reeking of brine and rusted iron. To the holder of the gold, the pulse resonated across the sea. The earth fractured in the north. You treat the first line as a ghost story, a bloodline extinguished 1,000 years ago. You are a fool. She is not the only one, and we are coming to collect our sister. I went rigid, my knuckles turning white as I crushed the paper into a jagged ball. No. My gaze snapped back to the garden. Sienna laughed at a gardener's remark, her face bright with a joy she hadn't known since her father sold her. She believed the nightmare died with Vane. She was wrong. The blinding corona of her power wasn't just a weapon. It was a beacon. She had ignited a signal fire visible to every nightmare lurking in the dark corners of the map. I gripped a flickering candle and held the corner of the letter to the flame. The parchment curled into black ash, the heat licking at my fingertips as I made my silent vow to the room. Let them come. Let the North wake from its winter. Let the demons of the old world rise to claim what they think is theirs. They would find a wall of steel waiting for them. They would find the Apex King standing as a shield for the gold. I strode toward the door, my intent fixed on the woman in the garden. I reached for the heavy brass handle, but my fingers froze. The letter used the word sister. The implication chilled my blood, a sudden frost settling in the marrow of my bones. If they were crossing the sea for her, they weren't coming to offer a homecoming. They were coming to eliminate the competition. I ripped the door open, the hinges screaming. The stakes had shifted. We weren't fighting for a throne or a border anymore. We were fighting for the right to exist. Guard! My voice cracked, like a whip through the hallway. Prepare the war room. The peace was a ghost. The real slaughter was only just beginning.
The frantic mobilization, orders echoing in the lower halls, never reached the isolated royal chambers, leaving me to awaken to an unnatural, suffocating quiet. The sheets leached the warmth straight from my skin. Frost laced the edges of the pillowcase beside me. My fingers brushed over cold linen instead of hot muscle. The molten copper heat of our bond had vanished. A biting winter draft knifed through the cracked balcony doors, sweeping away the heavy memory of the night before. I shoved the thick blankets aside. Darius. The cavernous bedroom swallowed the name. Silk dragged against my shoulders, shivering and dangerously thin against the morning chill. I bypassed the wardrobe. I crossed directly to the stone hearth. The fire held only a weak, dying amber glow. Black flakes dusted the hearthstone. Not wood, paper. Curled, fragile ribbons of ruined parchment rested on the brick. I knelt, dragging a thumb over the rim of the stone. The brittle edge crumbled to dark powder, leaving a greasy smear of ash across my skin. A sharp scent clung to the draft, burnt sealing wax, bitter iron gall, and a heavy, crushing undertone of brine, crashing waves and dead sea salt, filled a mountain fortress trapped hundreds of miles inland. He's hiding something. My wolf scratched the warning fiercely against my ribs. I rose, the silk slipping off one shoulder. The fragile, dawn-lit illusion of equality fractured into dust. He swore absolute truth. Now he was torching letters in the dark. I ignored the servant's bell pull. I left my heavy riding leathers hanging on the hook, my hand clamped around the iron door handle. The golden thread connecting our souls hummed with a violent, jagged frequency. A suffocating knot twisted behind my own sternum. Fear. Not the cold, tactical dread of an apex sovereign, the frantic, obsessive terror of a mate desperate to shield his equal. You don't get to lock me in a glass cage, Darius. The words cut through the frigid air. Not anymore. The heavy timber swung wide. A vacant, shadow-drenched corridor stretched out before me. No armored sentries, no steel clashing. A lethal silence. The rhythm in my throat doubled. I broke into a dead sprint. Bare feet hit freezing stone. The magnetic pull dragged me down the obsidian spiral staircase, past the gilded throne, deep into the subterranean chill of the War Council chambers. Thick oak barricaded the entrance. Muted, frantic voices bled through the heavy grain. How close are they? Darius's baritone vibrated with barely leashed violence. They crossed the border an hour ago, sire. General Vance's boot scuffed the floorboards, an erratic, terrified rhythm. They ignored the eastern checkpoint entirely. Did they engage? No, sire. They simply walked through a fortified iron gate. The frost, sire. It coated the steel, it coated the men. They shattered like glass. The blood inside my veins turned to slush. Frost. My fingertips grazed the cold brass ring of "Air the door." "Keep her sequestered," Darius commanded, the desperate possession of a mate sharpening his tone into a blade. "Her power is a volatile spark. If she walks into that winter, if I walk into—" What winter? I shoved both hands against the oak. The heavy doors exploded inward. The timber cracked against the granite walls with a deafening split. Darius whipped around. Dark circles bruised the pale skin beneath his eyes. His jaw clenched tight enough to snap bone. "Sienna, return to our chambers immediately." I stalked across the map room. I raised my soot-smeared hand, forcing him to look at the evidence. "Who is marching on this fortress, Darius? And why do their warning letters reek of dead sea salt?" He closed the distance, his towering frame blocking the exit. "Wife, listen to me. Do not manage me." The temperature in the stone chamber spiked instantly. A violent crackle of golden ozone snapped off my collarbone. The edges of the vellum strategy map began to smoke and curl. "Give me the truth." My voice dropped to a lethal whisper. "Or I will incinerate this entire war table to find it myself." Darius froze. His gaze flicked from the smoking parchment to the gaping archway at my back. Darkness eclipsed his vision entirely. "It's already here." The shadows creeping across the stone floor began to crystallize, with glittering white frost.
Frost crystallized on the stone floor before the first footfall even echoed. Jagged white rime bled from beneath the heavy oak doors. It slithered forward. A silent, starving winter. It struck the map table. The solid timber shrieked, instantly petrifying into splintered ice. The breathable air turned to plunging, lung-shredding frost. "Get behind me." My chest vibrated with a lethal, territorial command. I didn't wait for her strategic defiance. My grip locked onto her bicep. I hauled her flush against my spine. I ripped my broadsword from its scabbard. The honed steel shrieked against the plummeting temperature. "Guards!" The shout tore my throat raw. Nothing answered. Only a suffocating, dead, absolute silence. Boot heels clicked against the frozen granite. Slow, rhythmic, lethal. A solitary shadow breached the threshold. Not a battalion, not a feral threat. A woman. She towered in armor forged from blinding glacial glass. Her hair fell in sheets of brutal, untouched snow. Then the high shadows stripped away from her face. My heartbeat flatlined. The identical, arrogant slope of the nose. The exact defiant cut of the jaw. But where my mate burned with molten copper, this invader radiated dead, glacial blue. "So," a voice hollowed out by 1,000 frozen graves. "This is the little spark." Ice-pale eyes locked entirely on my mate. I ceased to exist. "Who are you?" A feral, possessive snarl ripped from my lungs. I advanced, leveling the iron blade directly at her throat. "This is the Obsidian Palace. You are trespassing." A bloodless, razor-wire smile stretched her lips. "I am Freya, of the northern tundra." Her armored boot shattered the frost beneath it. "And I am here to prune the family tree." I launched off the stone. No warning, no mercy. I swung for the decapitation. The apex speed of an alpha pushed my muscles to the tearing point. The iron broadsword connected with a concussive shock wave. Not flesh. A sudden, impenetrable glacier of solid frost. The agonizing reverberation shattered the bones in my wrist. The invader didn't even blink. A pale hand rose. 2 fingers flicked. A battering ram of absolute zero slammed into my sternum. The kinetic violence ripped my boots from the floor, my spine pulverized against the stone hearth. Darius! Sienna's scream fractured the freezing air. I fought to rise, my muscles misfired. Black ice welded my heavy iron chest plate to the granite. My lungs seized against the suffocating frost. The dead winter sank into my marrow, halting my heartbeat. Pathetic. The word drifted down like ash. She bypassed my paralyzed body, stalking directly toward my mate. Sienna anchored her boots to the floor. Tremors racked her frame, fueled by pure, unadulterated fury. Violent arcs of golden ozone snapped across her knuckles. Do not touch him. A lethal, rattling warning. Oh, little spark. Freya halted just out of striking distance. Pale nostrils flared, tasting the charged atmosphere. You reek of ozone. So volatile. So painfully unrefined. Who are you? The golden electricity surged, searing the retinas. Sizzling pools of boiling water erupted where Sienna's boots met the frost. The glacial woman leaned into the blistering heat. I told you. Bone-white fingers hovered mere inches from Sienna's cheek. I am the winter that kills the weed, and you are the weed. A war cry tore from Sienna's throat. She weaponized the golden storm. A blinding stellar burst of raw fire detonated from her core. The blast didn't move the invader an inch. Her bare, frost-bitten hand snapped shut around the inferno. Liquid sunlight violently clashed against sub-zero blue. Scalding vapor choked the entire chamber. The steam dissipated. The white-haired woman remained rooted to the stone. Her flesh was utterly unmarred. A patronizing sigh escaped her lips. Is that it? Cold dread spiked through my paralyzed veins. My mate wasn't just overpowered. She was prey to an apex sovereign. The invader lazily lifted her left wrist. Ambient moisture crystallized instantly. A jagged 6-foot javelin of black ice materialized, perfectly aligned with Sienna's sternum. Goodbye, sister. No. I tore at the black ice, ripping the skin from my own ribs in a desperate bid to reach her. The glacial spear snapped forward. A sickening, wet plunge of shattered bone echoed through the blinding frost, and a drop of hot crimson splattered against my frozen cheek.
The black ice blurred the air. It wasn't just fast, it was final. My boots fused to the granite floor. I didn't breathe, I didn't blink. The serrated point aimed dead center at my sternum. Die. The whisper turned to ash in my mind. Burn. The command detonated in my marrow. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I tore the floodgates off the hinges. The knot of golden fire behind my ribs didn't just untie. It went critical. The air in front of my face liquefied. A violent, coronal mass ejection erupted from my skin. The ice struck the heat. It didn't shatter. It screamed. Physics broke. The solid lance dissolved into a blinding, scalding white fog. A wall of pressurized steam blasted outward, coating the stone in instant, weeping moisture. I hit the floor hard. My knees cracked against the granite. The rock beneath me hissed, turning a dull, angry cherry red against my palms. Sloppy. The voice cut through the steam like a razor. The white mist parted. Freya stood untouched. Not a hair out of place. She flicked a single droplet of boiling water from her glass pauldron. Raw power, zero discipline. You are an infant, playing with a forest fire. She drifted closer. Do not touch her. Darius strained against his frozen cage, the black ice cracking audibly against his ribs. Freya didn't even glance his way. She stopped inches from me. The sub-zero radius of her power collided with my fever heat. A pressurized wind vortex whipped my hair across my face. Why? My voice was a ruin of smoke and ash. Why are you doing this? Because the bloodline cannot tolerate a weed. She reached out. I tried to ignite the gold again. Nothing. The tank was dry. Her fingertip, cold as the void, pressed against the center of my forehead. Agony. White, blinding lightning drilled into my skull. Not a headache, a branding. I choked on a scream. I won't kill you today, little spark. Her pupils were abysses of blue ice. I am merely tagging the livestock. She withdrew. A circle of absolute. Frost burned into my skin. It pulsed, a hook in my flesh. The trial of the elements begins in 3 moons. She glanced at the paralyzed king, then back to me. If you wish to keep your head, come north. She turned, her white cape snapping in the draft. Do not keep me waiting, sister. The balcony doors didn't open. They disintegrated into diamond dust. Freya stepped out into the blizzard. She didn't fall. The wind caught her, carrying her into the white oblivion. The howling draft whipped violently through the shattered glass, biting at my exposed skin as my lungs violently heaved, screaming for oxygen in the sudden crushing emptiness. I collapsed onto the cooling stone. Silence reclaimed the room. I touched the stinging spot between my brows. Frost flaked off under my thumb. I wasn't just hunted, I was already owned.
The black ice encasing my ribs splintered with the sound of a gunshot. Gravity reclaimed me. I hit the granite hard enough to taste blood. Supercooled steel seared my skin, branding the cold directly into my chest as the paralyzing magic evaporated. My lungs heaved, trying to process oxygen that felt like broken glass. Sienna. My boots scrambled for purchase on the slick, melted ruin of the war room floor. I didn't care about dignity. I didn't care about the pain. I crossed the distance in 2 strides. She huddled in the center of a blast crater. The stone beneath her knees still smoked, radiating the acrid stench of sulfur and boiled rock. Violent tremors racked her frame. Stay back. A warning, not a plea. My skin, it's going critical. I didn't listen. My hands clamped onto her shoulders. Agony blistered my palms instantly. She wasn't just warm, she was a living forge. The heat leached through my calluses, biting deep. Look at me. She lifted her face. The air seized in my lungs. A jagged, pulsating frost brand marred the center of her forehead. An alien, parasitic blue light beating in time with her heart. She branded you. Self-hatred coiled in my gut like a nest of vipers. I stood there, frozen, useless. I watched a foreign sovereign defile what was mine. The tournament, she rasped, her voice fracturing. In the north? We aren't going. I rejected it instantly. It is an execution. We have no choice. Her fingers dug into my vambrace, denting the boiled leather. She didn't just tag me, Darius. Black voids expanded, consuming the gold of her eyes. She pulled the trigger. What trigger? Sienna unlocked her fist. A sphere of flame hovered above her scarred palm. But the familiar gold was gone. The fire was being strangled by a violent, suffocating core of sapphire blue. She recognizes the blood. Sienna stared at the mutating flame. She wants to see if the frost kills the fire. I crushed her against my chest plate. The killing cold of my armor hissed against the fever heat of her skin, creating a cloud of steam between our bodies. Then, we will blind her with it. I stared at the shattered balcony. Snow drifted in, burying the wreckage of my home under a pristine, mocking white blanket. The war wasn't coming. It was already in the room. We go north. My voice dropped to a subsonic threat, but not to play by her rules. I forced her chin up, making her look at me, at the violence in my eyes. We go to slaughter the house. The terror in her gaze hardened into steel. 3 moons. 3 moons, I agreed. I hauled her to her feet. We stood in the wreckage of our command center, gold and iron, the ash and the frost. The gilded wolf had revealed herself. Now, the world wanted to break her. I laced my fingers through hers. Let them come. Sienna squeezed back, hard enough to bruise bone. Her golden irises bled entirely into black. Yes. The blue flame in her palm leaped higher, torching the oxygen between us. Let them all burn.
The immediate aftermath of the glacial invasion dissolved into a frantic, sleepless blur, with 3 days and nights bleeding together among the dust of the Royal Library. 72 hours of blistering agony finally bled into a hollow, localized freeze. The parasitic blue brand, etched into the center of my forehead, radiated a relentless, sub-zero ache, a sliver of dead winter, driving a glacial wedge directly against my frontal lobe. The midnight oil burned low in the grand archives, stagnant air choked on the scent of crumbling vellum, bitter iron gall ink, and my own sour exhaustion. A fortress of ancient, iron-bound texts walled me in. The bloodline of the first, the scorched earth annals, the topography of the dead north. I shoved the heaviest leather-bound volume closed with a violent crack. A suffocating cloud of grey dust erupted into the dim amber candlelight. Nothing. The word tasted like copper and defeat. Hundreds of thousands of pages offered absolute silence on a hidden royal sister. Total eradication of any northern trial. The official records insisted the glacial apex predators went extinct before the first iron swords were ever forged in fire. I drove the heels of my hands directly into my eye sockets. The frostbite scar pulsed with a sick rhythmic pressure, driving a railroad spike of pure agony deep into my optic nerve. The sun is hours away. My shoulders didn't flinch. The heavy, grounding scent of crushed pine needles and impending thunderstorms saturated the stagnant library air long before his shadow eclipsed the doorway. Darius filled the archway, blocking my only exit. He was already strapped into thick, midnight black riding leathers. A heavy, dire-bear pelt draped over his broad shoulders, secured by a solid steel clasp. He wasn't dressed for a journey. He was armored for a massacre. My brain refuses to shut down. I dragged my fingernails across the scarred wooden desk. The second my eyelids drop, the shadows crystallize into white frost. Boot heels struck the stone floor in a predatory, stalking rhythm. He bypassed the perimeter entirely, closing the distance in 3 strides. His scarred hands clamped over the wooden arms of my chair, violently twisting the heavy oak seat, until my knees were bracketed between his thighs. A suffocating, lethally protective cage. The horses are saddled. The baritone vibration rumbled straight into my chest cavity. The courtyard is already rigged for travel. I anchored my gaze to the steel buckles over his heart, calculating the tactical disaster. Darius, if I step foot in her absolute zero territory, if my baseline temperatures spike without a grounding anchor, you will hold the line. Do not patronize me. I shoved both hands squarely against his armored chest, forcing myself upward until we were eye to eye. I turned solid iron into liquid slag in a microsecond. A rogue sun flare lives inside my veins, and I lack the basic architectural framework to contain the fallout. My ribcage expanded, drawing a ragged, desperate lungful of air. Golden sparks arced dangerously between my trembling knuckles. I am a catastrophic liability. The raw, terrifying vulnerability finally bled into the open space between us. The glacial queen wields her frost like a scalpel. I am an untethered explosive. If this golden heat breaches containment, you will be the first casualty. Darius didn't flinch. Not a single muscle twitched in his jaw. His irises darkened into an impenetrable, obsessive slate grey. Then let me turn to ash. A leather-clad hand wrapped over my trembling, spark-lit knuckles. He dragged my palm flat against his chest plate, crushing my skin against the cold steel until the frantic, violent hammering of his own heartbeat transferred directly into my fingertips. "You are not a weapon of mass destruction, wife." His voice dropped to a territorial grounding rasp. "You are the dawn. The dawn resurrects the dead earth. It only scorches the ground when the sky tries to lock it inside the dark." He closed the final fraction of an inch, his mouth pressed deliberately, heavily, against the sub-zero scar corrupting my forehead. A slow, agonizingly hot brand of molten copper sinking into the dead winter ice. "Let the fire bleed," he commanded against my skin, his breath ghosting over the frost. "I will forge the barrel that aims it." My eyelids fluttered shut. The sheer tactical terror of the North didn't evaporate, but the frantic, blinding panic anchored into a cold, lethal resolve. The tundra is a graveyard. I swallowed the heavy lump of ash in my throat. The tundra is simply a geographical obstacle. He hooked a heavy thumb under my chin, forcing my face up to meet his lethal stare. "And you are the apex sovereign who melted the obsidian circle to slag." A dark, bloodthirsty curve hijacked his lips. "Strap on your armor, wife." His fingers curled around the nape of my neck, his thumb slowly tracing my pulsing carotid artery. "We are going to melt her winter to the bone."
A jagged crust of unnatural frost strangled the royal courtyard. 72 hours had passed since the invasion. The dead winter refused to melt. The war horses snorted and thrashed. Plumes of thick, white vapor violently expelled into the sub-zero draft. Iron hooves sparked against the iced granite. I wrenched the heavy leather straps of the saddlebags tight against my stallion's flank. Topographical charts of the dead north, salted rations, and a lethal arsenal of pure, forged silver. "Sire." General Kale's boots crunched over the frost. The arrogant commander my mate had publicly humiliated in the ballroom was gone. A grim, hollow-eyed tactician stood in his place. He stared rigidly at my iron breastplate. "The vanguard is assembled, 20 veteran trackers strapped into double-layered dire bear pelts." I gave a single, hard nod. Kyle swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply against his metal collar. His gaze flicked upward to the high stone balcony. "The infantry is bleeding morale. The myths surrounding the glacial wastes, the whispering dead." I yanked the iron cinch on the saddle with bone-snapping force. "Fear is a tactical advantage. Order them to weaponize it." Kale didn't retreat. He reached into his heavy cloak, his fingers trembling slightly against the wool. He extended a tightly rolled parchment, sealed with a violent smear of black wax. "Recovered at the northern perimeter, pinned to the chest cavity of a slaughtered sentry." I snatched the missive. The texture was horribly wrong. It wasn't vellum, it wasn't parchment. Soft, unnervingly pliant, and reeking of old copper. Cured human skin. My thumb cracked the brittle wax. The ink was a rusted brown slash across the pale leather. "The summons is absolute. The brand consumes the host. If the sun fails to breach the ice spire before the first moon wanes, the frost will stop her heart. Tick-tock, little sovereign." I crushed the morbid leather into a tight, sickening ball. The oxygen seized in my lungs. It wasn't a geographical tether. It wasn't an arrogant tag. It was a lethal, ticking parasite. I tipped my head back, finding the high balcony. Sienna braced her hands against the iron railing. Her dark hair violently whipped in the freezing draft, the flawless posture of an apex queen. But my tactical vision cut through the facade. A sickly, bruised blue ringed her lips. Her fingers dug constantly into her own biceps, desperately chasing a body heat that was already bleeding out. The glacial invader wasn't waiting for a formal tournament. She was executing my mate from the inside out. Scrap the supply wagons. The command vibrated with lethal intent. Kale flinched, his hand dropping to his sword hilt. Sire? The infantry remains behind. I unspooled the deadly tactical shift. We ride on horseback. No encampments. No rations unless the mounts collapse beneath us. The queen requires the carriage. My mate rides anchored to my spine. I vaulted into the leather saddle, the warhorse shifting under the sudden, violent weight. We do not have 3 moons, General. I stared at the crushed human leather wedged in my iron gauntlet. The sub-zero malice radiated directly through the steel plating. We have 14 days. I locked eyes with the woman on the balcony. Golden irises flashed back, full of blinding defiance. She had no idea her internal organs were slowly turning to ice. I would swallow this poison for her. The sheer terror of the parasite would only accelerate the freezing of her blood. Drop the ironwood. My command shattered the morning silence. Massive steel chains groaned as the fortress barricade ground open. The shadow-drenched mountain pass yawned wide. A jagged black scar cutting directly into the heart of a mythological winter. Sienna materialized in the courtyard, her heavy boots hitting the frost without a single stutter. She swung seamlessly into the saddle of her gray mare, a fluid violence she didn't possess. 30 days ago. Target acquired. A dangerous, thrilling smirk touched her blue-tinted lips. We ride. A flat, necessary deception. I drove my steel spurs into the stallion's flanks. Iron hooves pulverized the courtyard frost. We abandoned the impregnable obsidian fortress. We charged headlong into the dead, frozen earth. The biting, sub-zero wind instantly slashed across my jaw. I didn't waste breath on a pathetic, silent prayer to the skies. I closed the gap between our horses at a full sprint. My heavy, leather-clad arms shot out, violently hooking her waist. I dragged her entirely out of her saddle, crushing her freezing spine flush against my heated chest plate. The brutal impact knocked the wind from her lungs. Darius. I buried my face against the icy pulse of her carotid artery, wrapping my massive dire-bear cloak completely around her shivering frame. You do not leave my skin. My breath ghosted over the frost, clinging to her hair, the obsessive terror hardening into a lethal vow. Not until I sever the head of the winter that touched you.
The towering obsidian walls of the capital vanished behind us, surrendering to an endless, agonizing march through a progressively hostile, frozen wasteland. The dropping mercury wasn't a weather system. It was an executioner. 96 hours in the saddle. The fertile tree line had long since surrendered to jagged slate-grey rock, dissolving finally into a blinding, featureless white hell. The wind didn't simply blow across the tundra. It hunted. Sub-zero razor blades sliced directly through my heavy dire-bear cloak, bypassing the boiled leather to freeze the marrow inside my bones. The iron-shod hooves of my grey mare dragged against the thigh-deep drifts. Her massive chest heaved, a brutal, staggering stumble. "Hold the line!" The command fractured through lips that possessed the flexibility of frozen marble. Thick leather gloves dragged across the glacial brand stamped directly over my skull. The parasitic blue crystal beat in sync with my slowing heart. The dead winter bled straight into my veins. A suffocating leaden gravity dragged at my spine, burying my consciousness beneath 100 feet of abyssal frost. "Close the formation!" The baritone command violently shattered the howling gale. His massive cloaked silhouette tore through the white-out yards ahead. No encampments, no rations. He drove his black stallion with the merciless, frantic obsession of a man trying to outrun an avalanche. Darius. A pathetic, hollow rasp. The blizzard swallowed the syllables before they breached my collarbone. My frozen knuckles curled tight around the leather reins. I dragged at the golden reserve inside my chest, demanding a single tactical flare of heat to unfreeze my joints. The core struck absolute zero. The forge was dead. The chaotic stellar collapse that once weaponized my blood was gone, smothered into a suffocating, dying ember beneath the parasitic frost. The tactical equation collapsed. Pure, unadulterated panic spiked against my frozen ribs. I commanded the dawn. My body was an apex sovereign of heat. The winter shouldn't be able to breach the perimeter. The blinding white horizon fractured. Slate grey bled into pitch black. My frozen, gloved fingers surrendered their death grip on the leather. The frantic snapping of iron reins cut through the storm. The thunder of hooves violently reversed course. Gravity snatched me from the saddle. I plunged toward the petrified earth. A brutal, crushing force obliterated the fall. Thick leather and solid iron snapped around my ribs. Darius violently dragged me from the freezing air. He hauled my limp, dead weight directly across the pommel of his stallion, fusing my spine to his breastplate. "You do not let go." The vow vibrated with a terrifying, ragged edge. His chest radiated a blistering, primal inferno. The unadulterated heat of an alpha. Yet the molten copper warmth couldn't penetrate the dead winter, paralyzing my nervous system. Violent, bone-rattling tremors seized my muscles. My teeth cracked together with enough force to splinter enamel. The core is dry. The tactical report bled into a slurred, drunken whisper. "No surrender." A calloused, leather-clad hand viciously gripped my chin, forcing my face upward. "You do not authorize a shutdown. Open your eyes." He drove iron spurs back into the stallion's flanks. The massive warhorse surged into a suicidal, blinding sprint. Locate a breach in the rock. The desperate roar battered against the howling wind. "A subterranean fissure, sire." Kale's gauntlet slashed through the whiteout, indicating a jagged black throat in the approaching mountain face. 2 miles north." "Punch through the line." His slate-grey irises dropped to my face. The absolute, calculated control of the king was gone, replaced entirely by the lethal, blood-soaked terror of a mate. "Anchor your pulse to mine, Sienna." His thumb dug bruised hollows into my freezing jawline. "Burn the reserve. Do you hear me? Ignite the damn ash." I attempted to execute the order, but the creeping void cold numbed the panic. The absolute zero felt terrifyingly peaceful. Just holding position, my freezing lips shaped the lie. The iron band around my ribs violently jerked. The kinetic shock snapped my skull back against his shoulder. "If you close your eyes," his breath scorched my frozen cheek. "The frost stops your heart." The brutal, unvarnished tactical truth shattered the lethargy. I dragged my heavy lashes apart. He wasn't mapping the treacherous ice ahead. His obsessive gaze was anchored entirely on the sickly, necrotic blue staining my mouth. The oxygen starved from his lungs. The final puzzle piece violently locked into place. The brutal 96-hour march. The refusal to drop the iron anchor. He wasn't racing to intercept a political summit. He was attempting to outrun an execution. The frozen brand burning a hole in my skull wasn't a summons. It was a ticking stopwatch. A violent, wet cough tore through my freezing lungs, and a single drop of frozen black blood splattered against his silver chest plate.
Stagnant air choked on the stench of rotting pine and glacial dust. The jagged fissure in the mountain offered no true sanctuary, only a brutal, windless dark. "Ignite the deadwood." The command scraped my raw throat. "Burn the saddles if you have to." I hauled her deeper into the black throat of the cavern. Her weight was entirely wrong. A terrifying, hollow lightness. The parasitic frost brand illuminated the darkness, a necrotic blue pulse bleeding through her translucent skin. I dropped my heavy direbear cloak over the jagged stone. I lowered her onto the fur. Her ribcage barely rose. A wet, agonizing rattle fractured the silence. Sienna. Steel buckles shrieked as I ripped the iron chest plate from my shoulders. Clear the perimeter, General. Kyle's heavy boots halted near the cavern mouth. Sire, the kindling. Evacuate the cave. The lethal, subsonic vibration sent a shudder through the granite walls. Iron-shod hooves clattered wildly against the stone. Kale dragged the panicked war horses directly back into the blizzard. Absolute isolation crashed down. I tore the freezing leather boots from her calves. Solid frost coated her ankles. My violent, shaking hands ripped the frozen lacings of her tunic. Darius. A shattered wisp of breath. Heavy lashes parted. The ferocious sovereign gold was entirely suffocated by dead, clouded gray. I hold the line. I stripped away the rigid, ice-logged leather until only thin, damp linen remained. I discarded the last of my own armor, exposing bare skin to the freezing cave air. I dragged the massive direbear pelt over us, sealing out the dark. I crushed her freezing spine flush against my chest. A violent physical shockwave stopped my lungs. Zero thermal output. I was anchoring a corpse. Cold. Her rigid fingers weakly shoved at my collarbone. A tactical retreat. You will drop baseline. Let the winter try. I locked my arms around her ribs, crushing her flush against me. I am the Alpha. I carry the forge. For both of us. I tangled my legs over hers, pinning her freezing limbs against my own. I dragged her face into the crook of my neck. I weaponized the molten copper in my veins, forcing my core temperature to a blistering fever pitch. Bleed the heat. The obsessive mantra pounded against my skull. Time dissolved into a brutal, suffocating void. Inch by agonizing inch, the violent tremors subsided. The wet rattle in her lungs smoothed into a deep, steady rhythm. You identified the timeline. The hoarse accusation bled directly into my skin, my jaw locked tight enough to splinter bone. You knew the parasite was executing me. The jagged edges of her voice sharpened into steel. That dictated the suicide pace. My grip turned punishingly tight. Affirmative. You withheld critical intel. Panic accelerates the freezing process. The brutal confession tore from my throat. Terror feeds the ice. A heavy, loaded silence saturated the dark beneath the furs. She didn't flinch away from the deception. She shifted her weight, deliberately pressing her frost-bitten mouth directly against my pulse point. I am not paralyzed, Darius. The atmosphere violently shifted. She wasn't passively absorbing my thermal energy anymore. She was forging her own. A concussive rhythm battered against my sternum. Her heartbeat, not a frantic, terrified flutter, but a slow, rhythmic war drum of pure hostility. The glacial bitch tried to snuff the wick. A blistering wave of ozone and copper radiated from her pores. She attempted a full structural execution. Sienna tilted her chin. Blinding, sovereign gold flooded her irises. The chaotic, stellar collapse was gone. This was a concentrated, lethal blowtorch. The invader miscalculated the physics. My thumb dragged across her cheekbone, wiping away a smear of melted frost. Specify the error. She believes winter smothers the flame. Her hand snapped up. Cold fingers dug viciously into the hair at the nape of my neck. Her mouth crashed against mine, a scalding, violent brand. Sufficient heat vaporizes the glacier entirely. She broke the kiss, burying her face back into my chest with ruthless satisfaction. Rouse me at first light, husband. A chilling, bloodthirsty order. We have a bloodline to incinerate. I stared into the pitch-black cavern as her breathing leveled out. The necrotic blue brand on her skull violently flickered, heavily suppressed by a ring of blistered, glowing red flesh. The winter parasite wasn't dead, but the host was weaponizing. I dragged my teeth deliberately over her burning shoulder, letting the taste of salt and ozone coat my tongue.